School in Britain in the 1970s looked and felt completely different from anything that came after. The rules, the buildings, the silence expected of you, all of it belonged to an older world that was already beginning to crack. The cane was legal. The ruler across the backs of your fingers was routine. The blackboard was the only technology in the room. Outside the school gates, Britain was changing faster than it ever had. Inside, the old order held, formal, hierarchical, and uncertain of its own rightness. For the children who sat in those cold classrooms, school was simply what school was. Nobody questioned it. Let's step into that world. School in 1970s, Britain began with the uniform, and the uniform was not optional. Boys wore grey trousers, a white or pale blue shirt, a tie in the school colours, a blazer with the school badge on the breast pocket, and black leather shoes. No trainers, no jeans, no exceptions. Girls wore grey or navy skirts, a blouse, women the same blazer. The skirt had to sit below the knee, hair had to be tied back if it was long, no jewellery except a plain watch. The rules were not always written down, they did not need to be. You learned them on the first day. Arriving out of uniform meant being sent home to change. Senior teachers stood at the entrance each morning checking. The formality was deliberate. It signalled that you were entering a different kind of place, being governed by different rules from the street outside. Nobody questioned it. The building reinforced this. Most British schools in the 1970s were old, Victorian brick, thick walls, high ceilings that held the cold. Corridors were long and bare. Floors were polished wood or cracked tile. You noticed the smell of those floors on the first day back after the summer holidays. Floor polish and something older underneath, the accumulated residue of decades of children walking the same route. And by the second day you stopped noticing it. Central heating existed in some schools and not in others, and where it existed it did not always reach every room. Radiators clanked and hissed without fully warming the far corners. In winter, you kept your blazer on. Some children kept their coats on until a teacher told them to remove them. The windows were large and single glazed. Condensation ran down the inside on cold mornings, and the smell of school dinners drifted from the direction of the kitchen well before lunchtime. You could smell what was coming before you ever saw it. The day began with assembly. The whole school filed into the main hall by class in silence and stood in rows facing the front. The headmaster stood at the front. A teacher played the piano. The school sang a hymn. Not every child was religious. It did not matter. You sang. After the hymn came a reading. And after the reading came the headmaster's announcements. Reminders, warnings, commendations, the weekly register of what the school expected from you. His tone was level and final. You filed out by class in silence and walked to your form room. This happened every morning. Repetition was the point, repetition was control. The classroom was arranged in rows, desks faced forward toward the blackboard and the teacher's desk. You sat in an assigned seat. The teacher decided where you sat. The decision was not discussed. In primary school, the desks were wooden, with a lid that lifted for storage, and a small circular hole in the top corner. The inkwell, a remnant of an earlier era, now mostly decorative. In secondary school, the desks were often melamine top tables with plastic chairs. Either way, you sat in rows. Either way, you faced forward. The blackboard ran the width of the front wall, and the teacher wrote on it in chalk, and you copied what was written into your exercise book. If you missed something, you asked a classmate afterward. The teacher did not repeat. Chalk dust settled on the front rows. The felt eraser left pale streaks across the blackboard that never fully disappeared. Exercise books had marbled card covers, different colours for different subjects. You wrote in them with a pen. Many schools still required fountain pens for formal written work, and ballpoint pens were considered lazy and imprecise. Your handwriting was assessed and graded. Messy work was returned to be redone. On certain mornings, the BBC Schools radio broadcast came through a small brown speaker mounted near the ceiling. History programmes, nature programmes, music appreciation. The school had scheduled these broadcasts into the timetable. When they came on, the class went quiet and listened. The voice on the radio was formal, unhurried. You were completely certain of what it was telling you. When the broadcast ended, the teacher resumed from the front. No discussion followed unless the teacher initiated it. The teacher entered the room and you stood. Not because anyone reminded you, you stood automatically, because that was what you did. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, miss," said in unison, without being asked, as pure reflex. The teacher told you to sit. You sat. This happened at the start of every lesson, every day. Without variation. It was the first act of every class. It established everything that followed. Who held authority in this room? Who did not? That arrangement was not negotiable, and it was not temporary. It was simply school. Teachers in 1970s Britain were not there to be liked. That was not part of the arrangement. They were there to teach, to maintain order, and to enforce standards. You addressed them as sir or miss, never by a first name. Never. Male teachers wore suits, or at minimum a jacket and tie. Female teachers wore skirts or dresses. The formality of their dress was part of their authority. It marked them as a different category of person from the children in front of them. Teachers were not friends, they were authority figures. Nobody questioned this. When a teacher spoke, the class was silent, not mostly silent, silent. Talking without permission was not tolerated. You raised your hand and waited, you did not call out. And you did not turn to the person beside you. You waited, hand up, until the teacher acknowledged you, and then you spoke. This was the rhythm of every lesson, and the teacher talked. The class listened. Information moved in one direction only. The teacher did not ask what you thought. The teacher told you what was correct. Teaching methods had not changed since the 1950s. The teacher stood at the front and lectured. You took notes. You memorized facts and reproduced them on tests. In history, and you memorised dates, battles and acts of parliament. In geography, you memorised capital cities, rivers and exports. In English, you parsed sentences, identified parts of speech, and wrote compositions on assigned topics. Neat, correctly punctuated, full sentences throughout. Personal expression was not the goal. Correct reproduction of received knowledge was the goal. The teacher was the source. You were the vessel. That was the arrangement. And mathematics was taught through repetition until the method became automatic. Times tables were chanted aloud as a class every morning in the lower years. 7 sevens are 49, 8 eights are 64. The teacher called and the class responded in unison. Arithmetic drills filled the first 10 minutes of many lessons. Speed and accuracy were what mattered, no calculators. For straightforward sums, you worked by hand on paper showing every step. And for larger calculations, the kind that involved long division across multiple columns or working out percentages of big numbers, you used logarithm tables, a slim booklet issued to every pupil, columns of figures running down each page, consulted in silence while the teacher waited. If you could not show your working, the answer did not count. Getting it wrong meant doing it again. Doing it again was not punishment, it was simply how you learned. A physical punishment was not reserved for serious offences. It was woven into the ordinary texture of the school day. The ruler was the most common instrument. A teacher could reach across a desk and bring a wooden or metal ruler down across the backs of your fingers for talking in class, for daydreaming, for answering incorrectly in a way that suggested insufficient attention. This happened in some classrooms almost daily to the same children, without the need for any formal process. And the board rubber, a heavy felt block used to wipe the blackboard, was thrown across classrooms at children who were not paying attention. It was accurate, it hurt. Neither of these things required a visit to the headmaster. They were simply part of what happened in lessons. The cane was a different matter. It was kept in the headmaster's office, a long, thin piece of rattan, flexible, designed for the purpose. Boys were caned on the hand or across the backside, and the offences that earned it were consistent across schools: serious insolence, repeated disruption, fighting, theft, being caught smoking behind the sports hall. In some schools, caning happened on Monday mornings as a near ritual. The same boys called out week after week, the headmaster working through the list before the school day properly began. Being sent to the headmaster for the cane meant walking the length of the school. Every child you passed knew where you were going. You knocked. When you waited, you entered. The headmaster told you what you had done, and why this was the consequence. You held out your hand or bent over, the cane came down. You did not cry if you could help it. You walked back to your class. Your hand hurt for the rest of the morning. The mark sometimes lasted days. Getting caned at school meant punishment at home as well, and your parents sided with the school. The idea that the school might have been wrong did not seriously arise. And that was simply how things were. Streaming sorted children by perceived academic ability, usually by the end of primary school or in the first year of secondary. The A stream studied academic subjects and was pointed toward O levels. The C stream studied a narrower curriculum and was pointed toward the workforce. Teachers had lower expectations of lower streams. They taught them differently. Less demanding work, less encouragement, more management of behaviour. And children knew which stream they were in. They knew what it meant. It was not hidden from them. And the stream decided by age 12 was rarely escaped. School dinners were served at fixed times and you ate what you were given. A mashed potato, boiled vegetables that had been boiling since morning. The dinner ladies stood behind metal counters in white aprons and served from large containers with metal spoons. In some schools you collected a tray, went through the line, ate and received your portion at the counter. In others you sat at a table of 6 and a rotating student monitor, dished up from serving bowls, proper plates and cutlery laid out in front of you, one child per table taking their turn each day of the week. Either way, you did not choose what you were given. Either way, you finished it. The pudding was the fixed point of the meal. Semolina with a spoonful of red jam pressed into the centre. Or chocolate crunch with pink custard poured over the top. A combination that sounds wrong and tasted exactly right to every child who ever ate it. Leaving food was wasteful. The dinner lady noticed, not finishing meant no pudding. That was the rule. And it was enforced without discussion. The playground was tarmac. In most schools, there was no grass, no equipment, nothing except a flat expanse of asphalt, bounded by walls or wire fencing. And the games were invented and organised by the children themselves. British Bulldog was popular and regularly banned for being too rough. Conkers occupied October, the children threading chestnuts onto strings and swinging them at each other with genuine intent. The integrity of a conker was a serious matter. Soaking or baking your conker to harden it before a match was cheating. Your opponent would sniff your conker before play began to check. Offenders were named and banned from further games. Marbles were played in the gutters at the edges of the tarmac. Girls played 2-ball against the wall, 2 tennis balls, rhythmic throwing and catching, songs sung in time with the bounce. The recess monitor stood at the edge and watched for serious trouble. Minor injuries were not their concern. Children figured out rules and settled disputes themselves. That was simply how playtime worked. Nobody supervised it. Nobody needed to. Physical education happened regardless of the weather. But schools did not close for cold. Cross-country running in January meant running in January. Through mud. In cold. In shorts and a thin game shirt with your surname stenciled across the back in faded ink. No one asked if you were cold. You were cold. That was simply school. Cross-country in freezing rain meant running in freezing rain, in a t-shirt, in a thin blue sports skirt. Nobody asked if you were cold. The changing rooms were unheated. The floors were wet and cold underfoot. After PE, when you showered? The showers were communal, a row of heads along a tiled wall. Hot water that was sometimes actually hot and sometimes not. Privacy was not part of the design. This was how things were. Nobody considered it unusual. Boys and girls had separate PE classes. Boys played football, rugby and cricket depending on the season. Girls did gymnastics, netball and in some schools tennis. The separation was unquestioned. No conversation was had about whether this was fair or limiting. And it was the arrangement. Girls who wanted to study technical drawing or woodwork were redirected to home economics and sewing. The choice was made for them by the school, and their parents generally felt the school knew best. Dreams were redirected without discussion. That was simply how things worked. PE teachers occupied a particular position in the school hierarchy, louder than most, more physical in their interactions, quicker to reach for the slipper. and a boy who did not want to play football in freezing mud was not accommodated. He played, and the library was quiet and controlled. No talking, no running, no raised voices of any kind. The librarian enforced silence as strictly as any classroom teacher. You pulled books from shelves carefully and returned them to exactly the right place. Finding a book required understanding the Dewey Decimal System. There was no other way. The card catalogue stood in a wooden cabinet near the entrance. A small, shallow drawers full of index cards, typed on manual typewriters, one card per book, filed by author and by subject. You looked through the cards, noted the reference number, and walked the shelves until you found it. No computers, no internet. Cards, shelves, and patience. Returning a book late meant a fine. The librarian remembered who owed what. She always remembered. The social hierarchy of school was visible and understood by every child inside it. The children whose families had a car, the children who brought packed lunches from home in proper lunchboxes rather than taking school dinners, the children who received free school meals. Free school meals were means tested, and the children who received them were known. And the process of receiving them, handing over a ticket rather than money, queuing at a different point, made them visible to everyone in the canteen. Children are observant. The stigma was real. It was felt every day at lunchtime. And clothes told the same story. Your shoes told the same story. The divisions were visible and they were not discussed openly by adults, which meant children discussed them constantly. Race was present in British schools in the 1970s and largely unacknowledged by the institution. West Indian and South Asian children sat in classrooms where the curriculum contained nothing that reflected their history or their families' experience except as distant background to British achievement. And the languages and traditions they carried from home were not on the walls or in the textbooks. Casual racism from classmates went unaddressed. Racist language was used in playgrounds without consequence. Some teachers used it too. There was no formal mechanism for naming what was happening, no language in the institution for addressing it. That was simply how things were. Nobody questioned it, not officially, not yet. The teachers were beginning to organise, and the National Union of Teachers was increasingly active through the decade. Pay disputes, workload concerns, disagreements over the comprehensive reforms. Industrial action was coming. Work to rule campaigns meant teachers refusing duties outside contracted hours. The football team did not travel. The school play was cancelled. Inside the classroom, the teacher's authority remained intact. Outside it, the certainty was cracking. Children noticed the absences without understanding their cause. And something was changing in the adults around them. The adults did not explain it. What the system produced was a sorted population. Children who could pass examinations went in one direction. Children who could not went in another. The sorting happened early and was rarely revised. The stream decided by age 12 shaped the options available at 16. The options at 16 shaped the rest. Discipline came before creativity. Obedience was valued over independent thought. And the system was designed to produce workers who knew their place and stayed in it. That was not stated. It did not need to be stated. It was built into the arrangement of every classroom, every stream, every report card sent home for a parent to sign. By the late 1970s, the model was aging visibly. A few younger teachers arrived carrying different ideas. Child-centered learning, discussion rather than dictation, a different kind of relationship between teacher and student. A punk was outside the gates. A new skepticism about institutions was in the air. Some classrooms began to change, most did not. For most of the decade, school in Britain remained what it had been, cold, hierarchical, certain of its own authority, and ready to enforce that authority physically if it judged enforcement necessary. For those who remember it, the memories are specific. The smell of the floors on the first day back, and the sound of the cane in the headmaster's office, so audible from the corridor. The cold of the changing room floor under bare feet. The chocolate crunch with pink custard on a Wednesday. The hymn in assembly, sung by children who had not chosen the words, standing when the teacher entered, sitting when told to sit. Knowing by the age of 12 what the system had decided you were worth, and where it intended to send you. School in 1970s Britain is gone. The cane was banned in state schools in 1987. The buildings have been rebuilt or demolished. And the dinner ladies, the card catalogues, the BBC schools broadcasts, all of it belongs to a world that closed. Whether what replaced it is better depends entirely on who you were inside it and what the system did to you while you were there. For some, the structure gave shape to lives that needed it. For others, the sorting came too early and the expectations sat too low and too fixed to escape. The 1970s school did not ask which kind of child you were, it had already decided.